Hello and welcome to the latest episode of SkyTalk, the podcast dedicated to all things aviation. I'm your host, Oliver Merrily, a CAA qualified pilot, and joining me today is an FAA qualified pilot, EJ. And today we're going to be taking a look at how flight sims can be used in your flight training. So, hello EJ.
Hello.
So, I'm right in saying you're an FAA qualified pilot, right?
Yes, I am a private pilot.
Okay, brilliant. So I know for me, at least my personal use, flight sims have been really useful for me. So I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is, what specific features in flight sim make them an effective tool for training pilots? Now, this could be from a mobile flight sim all the way up to a Class D flight simulator.
Well, first of all, flight simulators are certainly effective tools for training pilots because they provide a realistic and safe environment for pilots to practice and improve their skill. Well, some specific features that make flight simulators could be high fidelity and visuals and very good displays. So flight simulators can use advanced computers and graphics and sound systems to create a realistic and representation of the cockpit and flight instrument and external environment. Another main part is the realistic flight dynamics, where flight simulators, I think, use mathematical methods to simulate the behavior of the aircraft and its systems, including aerodynamics, propulsions and navigations and all of the instruments that are there. It could be flexible. It's very flexible. You have scenarios. They can be configured to simulate a wide range of flight conditions, such as weather, failures, and aircraft configurations.
You know, I completely agree with all that you've said there. And I think the thing that, for me, that makes flight sims such a valuable tool for especially pilots training is that you can do any scenario that you want and you can do it as many times as you want. Like, I know for my flight training, you know, one feature that's really helped me is I've been from infinite flight all the way up to X-plane using that sim. And it's just the contact with air traffic control. It gives you the confidence, especially for me, that I needed for my flight training. So coming on to sort of the realism side of flight simulators now, like, how can flight simulators be used to sort of simulate real life scenarios that would be dangerous to perform in a real aircraft? Like, obviously there's some features that both you and I did in our training, for example, stalls, engine failures, and, you know, even things as engine fires in the cockpit that we had to train for. But how can flight simulators help a pilot prepare for those scenarios better?
Well, I think, as I said before, flight simulator is very flexible and it can give you a wide range of flight conditions that help the pilot to have a mindset of what it could happen.
Yeah.
And you have a debriefing and analysis, and it's all made up on ground. So you don't have all the experiences that you would have on flight. Mm-hmm. It's totally a different environment, but simulating the same one.
Yeah, exactly.
To replicate a physical aircraft in an emergency could be accurate, but at the same time could be very, very different from what we could have in real life.
Yeah.
We don't know what we can have and what to expect, of course, but that's why we train. That's why we always train. I think every 6 months, a pilot has to do like a check to see if you're still able to fly on these conditions and all that stuff. Because the aircraft itself is, I think, the safest vehicle in the world. So it's not likely to have these situations, but you still have the chances to have this.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have to think about that. But yeah, I think it's accurate, but it doesn't have to be accurate because the aircraft can be unexpected sometimes.
Yeah. So, okay, sort of coming on to my next question now. So, obviously, there's different levels of flight simulators, everything from, for example, infinite flight on your phone, all the way up to these huge level D simulators. But you, for your personal use, how have flight simulators... Well, okay, what I'm trying to say is, what flight simulators would you recommend for pilots in training? Because I know that there's many things that I've benefited from, but from a variety of different flight simulators. So, for example, infinite flight, it was easy, and I learned the fundamentals about flying. So, for example, your V speeds, your taxiing, I learned all that, and then I just transferred that all over to X-Plane. So, just what is your favorite flight simulator?
Well, we must firstly distinguish the professional simulators and the ludicrous simulators. You are talking about X-Plane and Infinite Flight. We can also add Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is the latest one and it's the most realistic. But simulators in general are in basically two main categories. You play with it or you work with it. I think to play with it and work with it at the same time, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 is the latest one and has the best visuals, not the best graphics, I think. The best graphics, it's X-Plane, of course, or Prepper 3D.
Yes.
Prepper 3D, it has a lot of add-ons that are a little bit expensive, but very good add-ons. Yeah. But I think overall, Microsoft Flight Simulator has everything in it.
Yeah.
Has visuals and fidelity.
Exactly.
And all that stuff. But, we have also simulators that real pilots use, like the CAE one that it's in England and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. That are like full motion, stationary.
Yes, I see.
And those are used for training.
So, yeah. Coming on to my next question, one of the biggest questions that we've been asked is, how do flight simulators compare to traditional training methods in terms of cost and effectiveness in preparing pilots for the real world? So this was asked by someone who is a pilot in training, and the cost of flight training is getting more and more expensive. It's sometimes now £200-300 for an hour's flight with an instructor. So he asked, are they cost effective? Is it worth spending £2,000 on a flight simulator, a good PC, or is it better to spend £2,000 on 20 hours of flying?
Well, flight simulators can be more cost effective and effective than traditional training methods in preparing pilots for real world flight in several ways, because it's flight simulators are also cost effective for the training of pilots, but it also eliminates the need for expensive aircraft and fuel. But real flight, it's, as it says, it's realistic.
Yes,
it's realistic training. Yeah. You have physics, you have scenarios, real scenarios,
and
and you can't feel.
Yeah.
Yes.
From my point of view, like flight simulators, they're fantastic, but it's never the same experience. As soon as you hop in a plane, the smells, the sound, the vibrations, it's just something that you can't replicate. And all these tiny things that people might think, that doesn't matter, like they actually do matter. Like hearing the engine RPM and knowing, okay, that's where I need to be. It's just so hard to replicate. Feeling the engine, feeling the control surfaces when you go and do a 60-degree turn for your training, feeling the buffet on the control column when you go and pull back to do a store. It's just something that you can't replicate in flight simulators. And I'm sure you agree with me with that.
Yes, indeed. But flight simulators are more flexible. You are able to push the limits, where on the other side, on real flight, you cannot, because it's dangerous for you. If you simulate like a stall or a spin, yes, you have procedures, but at the same time, those are emergency situations sometimes, and it could lead in very dangerous situations, where in simulators, you're in a safe environment, you're underground, and you're not moving. Well, that's flexibility and safety, I think.
I see.
And also, you have debriefing and analysis that all the simulators collect from your flight data, where on a Piper 28, I think that you don't have an analysis or a debriefer that gives you all the analysis that you've done on flight.
And there's that flight. I think to answer his question, I think yes, flight simulators are a fantastic tool for aiding you, and I think aiding is a very important word. When I say aiding, I don't mean getting you your pilot's license, because it will definitely not get your pilot's license. There's many different factors to play, but I think that it's a fantastic aid. But I think spending the money, getting time in a real aircraft is going to be really beneficial for you in so many different ways. And I think you can agree with me, when you were doing your license in America, it's completely different to when you got home and were flying in X-plane.
Well, yes, indeed. It's a more realistic. So you have a feedback.
Yeah.
Where you don't have it on a simulator. Even though you might be flying on a full motion, you still don't have the forces that you would have.
Exactly, and that was my point. Actually being able to feel the aircraft and get to know it, and see how it behaves. So, coming on to my last question is, how can flight simulators be used to evaluate and assess a pilot's performance and progress during training? Because when you go into these big aviation schools, when you work with CAA or in the UK Leading Edge, you have to have a type rating to be able to fly these bigger aircraft, as you do with smaller aircraft. You have a type rating, I have a type rating for a PA-28, you have a type rating for a PA-28. Although simulators aren't needed for that, because of the cost is relatively lower compared to those of an A320 or an A380. But I think, how effective are they at assessing a pilot's performance, perhaps higher up in your training when you're on level D full motion simulators?
Well, flight simulators can be used to evaluate and assess pilots' performance, and it can also evaluate its progress in training by replicating real-world flight scenarios and conditions. Well, these scenarios can include emergency procedures where you cannot in real life, or instrument failures, and other challenging situations that the pilot may encounter during an actual flight. The simulator can track and record, as I said before, the debrief and analysis that the pilots do and respond on flight, and allowing instructors to evaluate their performance and provide feedback.
Yeah, and I think
additionally,
I think you said the word that you said there, feedback, is so crucial in flight training, because every single day, even if you're a 60-year-old pilot, every day is a learning day, and feedback is the most crucial thing. And it's so much easier to get feedback from a flight simulator than it is for in the cockpit, because so much more is going on in the cockpit. Both you and your flight instructor aren't entirely focused on giving feedback. You're focused on performing a safe flight of an aircraft. And in these simulators, your instructor's only purpose is to provide you with constructive feedback.
Yes, indeed. I think flight simulators can be used for training pilots, because it allows them to know what they are doing wrong if they do something wrong, and it allows the instructor to know what they're doing, because they are still student pilots at the end. So they don't know what they're doing. So it's a safe environment at the end.
Well, thank you very much, EJ, for coming along and doing this podcast with me. And thanks for all of you for tuning in to this episode of SkyTalk. We'll be back with more aviation news, analysis, and questions. Until then, fly safe.